The chamber of judgment glittered like a crown of cruelty. 1,000 crystalline torches suspended in weightless arcs above the grand court of the empire. Their glow spilled across pillars carved from the bones of extinct beasts, onto marble floors so polished they seemed to swallow the reflection of every trembling prisoner herded inside. The alien courtiers had gathered in layers of balconies, their robes trailing like rivers of jeweled fabric, their voices a tide of expectation. And at the heart of it all, lounging across his throne as if the universe were nothing but his upholstered seat, sat the Galactic King. His laughter was a low thunder that rippled through the hall before he even spoke, as though the joke had begun long before the humans arrived. The prisoners were marched forward, women in torn uniforms clutching their children, the little ones wide-eyed and pale against the spectacle of alien splendor. Their boots scuffed the marble, their chains clinked in rhythms that were music only to those who mocked them. The king leaned forward, his mouth stretching into a crescent of predatory amusement. His voice carried without effort, as if the chamber itself bent to obey him. "So these," he drawled, gesturing lazily with a clawed hand, "are the mighty humans? These fragile breeders and their squalling spawn? This is what your kind dares call warriors." Laughter cascaded from the balconies like shattering glass. Alien dignitaries clutched their stomachs, some choking on their own mirth. A tall insectoid with a thorax of gold nearly toppled from his perch as he beat his wings in hilarity. Even the guards allowed themselves smirks, their weapons lowering slightly as they basked in the king's ridicule. A woman among the prisoners tightened her hold on her daughter, her knuckles pale, her lips pressed to the girl's tangled hair as though shielding her from the laughter. Another child whimpered and was hushed by a mother whose eyes burned with silent fury. None dared speak. Not yet. Among them stood a man, though his presence was strangely diminished by posture alone. His shoulders slouched, his wrists bound in ornamental chains that glittered almost comically under the lights. He wore no uniform, only plain dark cloth scuffed by travel. His face was unremarkable at first glance, a polite smile resting there, eyes lowered in deference. While the women bristled and the children cowered, he simply seemed to wait, as though attending a lecture he had heard many times before. The king's laughter softened into a grin of teeth meant to dazzle and terrify. "Tell me, human," he said, singling out the man with a sudden flick of his gaze, "do you enjoy this pageant? Do you find our hospitality amusing?" The man lifted his eyes. They were brown, ordinary, almost gentle. He dipped his head in a motion that was part bow, part nod. His voice, when it came, was steady, low, wrapped in courtesy. "Your Majesty, I find your hospitality unforgettable." The courtiers erupted again, mistaking politeness for surrender. The king slapped the arm of his throne, delighted. "Unforgettable," he says. A charming euphemism for despair. He leaned forward. "Tell me, why should we keep you alive, human? You and your breeders? You add no glory to our empire. Your women will serve as amusements. Your children, perhaps as pets." A ripple of shock passed through the women, but the man's smile did not falter. He inclined his head once more. "Because, Majesty, it is unwise to laugh at mothers and their children. Empires have cracked for less." A hush touched the edges of the balconies, but only briefly. Then the wave of laughter roared louder, dismissing him entirely. The king wiped a tear of mirth from his eye. "Oh, how delicious!" The cub attempts a growl. The man did not answer. He lowered his gaze once again, as if yielding to the tide. But those who stood close, those who happened to glance longer than they should, might have noticed the faintest curl of something colder than resignation in the corner of his lips. The king rose from his throne, a towering silhouette draped in flowing emerald robes that shimmered with embedded stars. He spread his arms wide to his courtiers, his voice rolling with theatrical grandeur. "Behold the spoils of war, weak flesh to decorate our markets, to remind every system of what becomes of defiance. Their women will be bought and sold. Their children will crawl as playthings. And their men? Their men will learn to kneel until their knees are stone." Thunderous applause, cheers, jeers aimed like spears at the prisoners. A child hid behind her mother's skirt, her small hands pressed against her ears. The man in chains finally lifted his head fully. His eyes scanned the balconies not with defiance, but with something far more unnerving, calm appraisal, as though cataloging every face, every gesture, every crack in the marble walls. When his gaze returned to the king, his smile was polite again. "Our children," he said softly, but the chamber carried his voice further than expected, "are our future, and our mothers are our generals. You may mock them now, but history does not remember the laughter of kings. It remembers the wars they woke." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, the laughter stuttered, tripped over itself. A few courtiers glanced at one another, uncertain if they had heard threat or jest. The king, unwilling to cede silence, barked a laugh louder than the rest, and the court obediently followed. "History," the king sneered, settling back into his throne. "History will remember only that you knelt here today, in chains, before a king whose empire spans 1,000 worlds. It will remember that humanity's end began with a whimper, not a roar." The man inclined his head. "Then, Majesty, I suggest you listen closely. Roars are often mistaken for whispers, until they shake the walls." The king snapped his claws, dismissing the exchange. Guards jerked the chains of the prisoners, pulling them toward the side halls where auctions awaited. The women were herded, children clutching skirts and sleeves, while laughter still rained from above. The man allowed himself to be tugged along, though his steps were measured, unhurried. His eyes flickered once more across the grandeur of the hall, the torches, the bones, the marble, and then rested again on the king. For the briefest instant, his smile slipped, revealing no rage, no panic, only the faint curve of inevitability. And as the echoes of laughter swelled again, he whispered, so soft it could have been mistaken for prayer, yet somehow sharp enough to reach the king's ears. "You shouldn't have done that." The corridors of the palace stretched like veins of a giant beast, lined with obsidian stone that shimmered faintly with embedded crystal veins. The humans were herded through these arteries of power, past guards whose armor glowed with shifting hues of the empire's banners. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every breath of the children sounded fragile in the hush that followed the chamber's laughter. The courtiers were dispersing into private halls, still chuckling, repeating the king's jests as if they were pearls of wisdom rather than cruelty. The women were led to one side, ushered into holding cells perfumed with alien incense meant to disguise the stench of fear. The children clung fiercely, unwilling to be separated, and even the guards seemed annoyed by their refusal to release one another. Yet the man in chains was not pushed with them. He was taken elsewhere, up a grand staircase toward the council chamber, where decisions sharper than blades were forged. There, beneath vaulted ceilings that painted the illusion of galaxies slowly turning, the king presided once more, this time surrounded by his ministers and generals rather than sycophants. Their bodies were diverse. Serpentine coils, avian beaks, gelatinous forms shimmering with bioluminescence. All bore the arrogance of species who had ruled for centuries without challenge. They glanced at the chained man with faint curiosity, as though he were an exotic pet brought for after-dinner entertainment. The king gestured lazily. "Speak, human. You amuse me. Tell us of your world. What do your kind eat, besides the lies you feed yourselves?" The man's smile widened faintly, polite. His voice dipped in courtesy, like bread into wine. "We eat many things, Majesty. Beef roasted over open flame, corn sweet from summer sun, milk thick with cream, eggs gathered at dawn. We eat together as families, telling stories across the table. Sometimes, when the war ends for a day, we eat pies." A ripple of laughter circled the room, though one avian minister cocked his head, intrigued despite himself. The king sneered. "Primitive rituals around fire and flesh. Your kind clings to the dirt as if it loves you back." The man inclined his head. "It does, Majesty. The dirt is where we plant and where we bury. It is patient. It waits for us to return. And when we do, it remembers." Unease flickered in a few eyes, but the king pressed forward. "Tell me, then, will you drink, humans? What intoxicants dull your tiny fears?" The man's smile took on a shade of mischief. "Coffee," he said. "Black as midnight, bitter as truth, hot enough to burn away despair. We drink it when we wake, so the day remembers who we are." Confusion spread, then amusement. Several ministers cackled in disbelief. "Coffee," one barked. "A peasant's brew, a child's potion." "And yet," the man said softly, "wars have been started before morning's cup was served. Ask any commander who dared speak to a soldier before coffee. You may find scars for answers." A few alien generals chuckled uneasily, not entirely certain he was joking. The diplomat's smile remained, disarming yet edged with something that could not be named. The king waved dismissively. "Your humor is quaint. Your species hides behind quirks and curiosities, hoping to confuse us. But confusion is not strategy." The man's eyes glimmered faintly in the shifting starlight above. "Confusion, Majesty, is the seed of strategy. It buys us the one thing more valuable than weapons." "And what is that?" the king asked, bored yet faintly irritated. "Time," the man answered, with the ease of someone stating a universal law. The ministers shifted uneasily. One, a gelatinous advisor whose form pulsed with thought, muttered through translator nodes, "He speaks too calmly for a prisoner." But the king brushed it aside. He turned the conversation into spectacle, prodding for more tales of humanity's absurdities. The man gave them freely, wrapped in politeness and dry humor. He spoke of baseball games under open skies, of grandmothers wielding frying pans as fearsome weapons, of American highways stretching farther than many alien colonies. He described Thanksgiving feasts where enemies sat as family, at least until dessert. The chamber erupted often in laughter, though some listened too closely. One avian general asked, half mocking, "Why do you sing in war?" "Our reports show your soldiers sing even as they march into fire." The man's smile turned faintly wistful. "Because silence is too polite, General. And sometimes, if death waits at the end of a field, we'd rather meet it humming." The avian general fell silent, feathers bristling. The king chuckled, but quieter now. He leaned back, drumming claws on the arm of his throne. "So, you charm with words. But words are smoke. Where is the fire? Where is humanity's roar?" The man bowed his head. "Majesty, fire never announces itself. It only waits for the spark." A hush fell, almost imperceptible, but enough for the courtiers to glance at one another with discomfort. The king shifted, clearly irritated by the shift in tone. He barked a laugh, forcing the tension away. "Enough. You play with riddles. You think yourself clever. But your women and children sit in cages as we speak, and your species will soon be no more than a footnote." He rose, his robes rippling like a storm. "Your spark has gone out." The man looked up, his eyes catching the glint of the artificial galaxy turning above them. His smile did not waver. "Majesty, if you believe that, listen closer. Sometimes sparks travel farther than expected." The king gestured to the guards. "Remove him. Let him watch his kind souled, so that he may learn humility before his execution." The guards yanked his chains, dragging him from the chamber. He did not resist, his steps unhurried. As they hauled him down corridors humming with alien energy, he caught glimpses through narrow windows, warships gleaming in orbit, banners of conquest draped across spires, citizens cheering their monarch. The empire believed itself eternal, as all empires do. In the holding pens, women huddled with children, whispering lullabies under the breath. The guards shoved him inside, chains clattering. He dusted himself off with casual dignity, then sat cross-legged against the wall. The children stared at him, wide-eyed, uncertain whether to fear or trust. One small boy, perhaps 6 years old, whispered, "Are we going to die?" The man looked at him, smile warm yet unsettlingly calm. "Not today," he said. "Today we wait." The boy frowned. "Wait for what?" The man leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret meant only for children. "For the sound that comes before everything changes. You'll know it when you hear it." The boy pressed closer to his mother, unsettled but strangely comforted. The women exchanged glances, sensing in the man not despair, but a kind of quiet certainty, that unsettled them even more than the laughter of the aliens. Hours passed in the artificial twilight of the pens. The aliens above feasted, celebrating the king's spectacle. Toasts were raised to the humiliation of humanity. Music echoed, strange dissonant chords meant to remind the galaxy who held power. And then, faintly, through the thick walls, a sound emerged. Not loud at first, just a distant, steady hum, like the purr of an ancient engine or the thrum of a heart too large to ignore. The children stirred, tilting their heads. The women looked toward the ceiling. The guards outside shifted uneasily, their armor's glow flickering. The man in chains opened his eyes, his smile unchanged. He rose slowly, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Do you hear that?" he asked softly. The children nodded, their little faces lit with confusion. The women stiffened. The guards reached for weapons, uncertain. The man stepped forward, chains rattling, his eyes fixed on the far wall, as though he could already see through it into the stars. "That," he said, his voice low, but carrying with uncanny clarity, "is the sound that comes before everything changes." And then the alarms began to scream. The alarms tore through the palace like a wounded beast's scream, shrill and unending, vibrating through crystal walls and marble floors until every guard's grip faltered on his weapon. Lights shifted from their royal glow to harsh crimson pulses, painting the corridors as if the empire itself bled. The hum that had whispered moments before now roared into clarity. Engines, hundreds of them, shattering the illusion of security above the capital world. Children clung tighter to their mothers, eyes wide in terror at the sudden cacophony. Guards rushed past the holding pens, shouting in clipped alien tongues, their voices cracked with panic. Even the women, hardened by days of captivity and humiliation, blinked in bewilderment at the chaos. Only the man in chains stood calm. He tilted his head, listening as if to a familiar hymn, then exhaled with something dangerously close to relief. The doors burst open, guards flooding inside with weapons raised. Their orders were panicked, their posture sloppy with fear. One pointed at the man. "You. Speak. What is this?" The human smiled politely, as though answering an academic query. "That," he said, "is your sky breaking." The guard snarled, jabbing him with the butt of his weapon. But before the strike landed, the walls shook with the concussion of a bombardment. Dust rained from the ceiling, lamps shattered. The floor lurched as if the planet itself recoiled. The children screamed, guards stumbled, and the man slipped forward in the confusion, his chains no hindrance at all. He moved with sudden precision, his hands snapping up, the chains wrapping around the weapon's barrel. A twist, a pull, and the guard crashed to the ground. The other guards reacted too late. The man's movements were fluid, practiced, each motion economical. He used the chains not as shackles, but as whips, each strike cracking skulls, disarming weapons, dropping bodies. Within moments, silence returned, broken only by alarms and the distant thunder of war. The women stared at him, stunned. One finally found her voice. "Who are you?" He offered the faintest bow, still smiling, though his eyes were sharp now, stripped of pretense. "A terrible diplomat," he said, before scooping up a fallen weapon. Outside, the city burned. Through shattered windows they glimpsed the sky aflame with streaks of fire, human ships cutting through the Empire's fleet with savage efficiency. The aliens had expected beams, neat duels of light, but humanity had unleashed something older, heavier, more brutal. Kinetic slugs punched holes through dreadnoughts, nuclear detonations blossomed like hateful suns. Electromagnetic pulses crippled systems the aliens had deemed invulnerable. Ships toppled from orbit, their carcasses carving molten trails across the capital's surface. The man led them through twisting corridors, every turn illuminated by explosions. Guards tried to block their path, but he dispatched them with unnerving calm, wielding the alien rifle like an extension of his will. Between each shot, his courtesy never faltered. To the women he said, "This way, please," as though guiding them through a garden. To the children, "Keep close. Watch your step." They burst into a hall lined with glass that overlooked the capital city. Towers once proud now belched smoke, Streets writhed with fleeing citizens. The palace spires shuddered under shockwaves. Above it all, the human fleet loomed, dark and relentless, their banners of earth stark against the glow of burning skies. The children pressed against the glass, awe mixing with fear. "They came for us," one whispered. The man smiled gently. "Of course they did. Humanity never leaves its children behind." The women exchanged glances, the weight of those words striking deeper than any explosion. But the reprieve ended quickly. The chamber doors crashed open, and alien soldiers poured in. Dozens this time, armored in gleaming exosuits, weapons humming with lethal energy. At their head, a general whose mandibles clacked in rage. "Contain them," the general shrieked. "The king commands their heads." The man sighed, almost theatrically, as if embarrassed by the inconvenience. "Children," he murmured, "close your eyes." Then he moved. The firefight erupted in flashes of blue and red. Alien weapons shrieked beams across the chamber, slicing marble, shattering glass. The man's rifle spat thunder, kinetic rounds tearing through armor the aliens had thought invincible. He rolled low, whipped chains across a soldier's legs, ripped the weapon free, and turned it into another's chest. Every motion was efficient, rehearsed 1,000 times in shadows before this day. The women shielded the children, crouching against the far wall as the chamber dissolved into chaos. The windows shattered, wind roaring in, carrying smoke and the metallic tang of war. Explosions above rumbled like judgment, echoing the ferocity inside. One soldier lunged too close. The man pivoted, disarming him with a sharp twist, then pressed the weapon into the boy from earlier. "Hold this," he said calmly. "Point it at the floor. You're guarding your mother now." The boy's eyes went wide, trembling hands clutching the weapon like a sacred relic. He nodded fiercely, as though entrusted with a king's crown. Minutes stretched like lifetimes, then silence fell again. The general lay broken, armor split, mandibles twitching in disbelief. The man exhaled, dropping the overheated rifle. He straightened his clothes, adjusted his cuffs, and gave the group a reassuring smile. "Shall we continue?" They moved through the palace's burning veins. Alarms blared in every corridor, courtiers screamed as they fled, and the throne's golden banners smoldered in ash. Every window framed a different apocalypse, the Empire's fleet reduced to wreckage, their ships torn apart by weapons they had deemed archaic, crude, beneath notice. Humanity's brutality was revelation. The women whispered among themselves as they followed. "This isn't just a rescue," one murmured. "It's an invasion." The man glanced back, his smile never fading. "It's both. They mocked our mothers and our children. That leaves us no choice but to introduce ourselves properly." They reached a grand atrium, its vaulted ceiling now cracked and raining dust. The king himself appeared at the far end, flanked by elite guards still untouched by the chaos. His robes were torn, his crown askew, but his arrogance remained. His voice boomed across the distance. "Human, you dare bring war to my palace?" The man stepped forward, chains still dangling from his wrists, though they no longer bound him. He bowed slightly, every inch the polite diplomat. "Majesty, with respect, you brought war to us. We simply returned the courtesy." The king snarled, signaling his guards. "Kill him. Kill them all." The guards advanced, a wall of steel and fire. But before they reached the humans, the atrium shook with a deeper rumble. The ceiling split, daylight and smoke pouring in as a human dropship smashed through, slamming into the marble floor with a quake that toppled statues. Its doors blew open and armored figures surged out. Humans in powered suits, visors glowing, weapons gleaming with primitive menace. "Marines," the man said softly, as though introducing old friends at a dinner party. The Marines moved with lethal grace, rifles barking, grenades bursting, scattering the king's guards like brittle toys. The atrium became a slaughterhouse, alien screams swallowed by human war cries. The king stumbled backward, disbelief shattering his mask of arrogance. "Impossible," he muttered. "You were weak, broken. Your kind cannot." "Cannot what?" the man interrupted, stepping closer, voice still calm, still smiling. "Cannot plan? Cannot bleed? Cannot wait. He gestured to the women and children. We were waiting. You mocked the wrong part of us. The king's eyes flared with rage and terror, yet he turned and fled, his robes vanishing into smoke-filled corridors. His guards lay dead, his palace torn open, his fleet collapsing above. The Marines secured the civilians, guiding the women and children into the dropship. One saluted the man sharply. Sir, extraction secured. Fleet reports enemy command crippled. The man nodded, as though this were no more surprising than a change in weather. He turned to the women. You're safe now. Stay close to the Marines. They'll see you home. The boy still held the weapon he'd been given, knuckles white. The man crouched beside him, prying it gently free. You did well, he murmured. Someday you'll understand how much. The boy nodded, eyes shining with pride and fear. The alarms continued, the battle above raging, but something fundamental had shifted. The Empire's laughter was gone, replaced by silence too heavy to ignore. Humanity had arrived not as prey, but as predator, and the galaxy would never laugh so easily again. As the drop ship lifted, the man remained behind in the atrium, staring toward the smoke-veiled corridors where the king had fled. His smile lingered, but it had hardened into something colder, sharper. He whispered words meant for no one but himself, though the walls seemed to listen. We're just warming up. The palace burned with a grandeur only empires could manage, each collapsing spire a testament to arrogance meeting its end. Smoke drifted through fractured ceilings, curling around shattered mosaics of conquest that had once celebrated the king's dominion. The dropship carrying the women and children vanished into the skies, its engines fading into the roar of battle above. Yet the man did not follow. He lingered in the ruined atrium, chains clinking softly as he turned toward the corridor where the king had fled. His smile, ever polite, remained, though its warmth was gone. The halls echoed with the stampede of retreating guards, their discipline broken, their certainty crushed. The king had never known fear, not truly, and now it raced ahead of him like a shadow stretching to infinity. He stumbled through gilded corridors, his crown askew, his robes scorched by falling embers. The grandeur of his empire clung to him in tatters, and still he roared at fleeing soldiers to turn and fight. But none listened. They had seen the skies betray them. They had watched fleets dissolve into ash under weapons they had mocked as primitive. The man followed at a measured pace, unhurried, his steps echoing steadily, a sound as inevitable as the tolling of a bell. He passed murals depicting the empire's triumphs, each now cracked and falling to dust. He trailed smoke and silence, his politeness sharper than any blade. Above the city, the battle reached its crescendo. Human ships pressed the advantage mercilessly, their strategies brutal and efficient. Where the Empire fought with elegance, humans fought with finality. Entire supply lines vanished in blossoms of nuclear fire, communications choked by jamming waves that rode in on frequencies the aliens had dismissed as obsolete. Cloaked vessels slipped through defenses, planting charges that gutted warships from within. The Empire's tactics, honed for centuries of dominance, dissolved in the face of human unpredictability. Across the galaxy, other species watched through trembling broadcasts. The humiliation of the king, broadcast by his own courts before the alarms, had already spread. They had seen him laugh at women and children. They had heard the humans' calm warnings. And now they saw fire raining on the capital, saw a fleet dismantled in hours. What they felt was not pity, it was calculation. Some whispered of rebellion, others of surrender, but none doubted the truth. The age of the Empire had cracked. The king burst into his throne chamber, panting, his arrogance eroded by the first taste of mortality. The jeweled torches sputtered in the smoke, the great banners burned at their edges, and the throne itself seemed less a seat of power than a cage. He sank into it out of habit, clutching the armrests, as though they could anchor him against the tide. His guards ringed him in a last desperate shield, their weapons trembling. The man entered without hurry, chains dragging behind him across the marble. He paused in the doorway, straightened his sleeves, and offered a courteous bow. "Majesty," he said, his tone as soft as ever. "Shall we finish our conversation?" The king bared his teeth, spittle flecking his lips. "Animal, you dare stand in my hall and mock me?" The man's smile tilted slightly. "Majesty, I have not mocked you once. I told you truths, and you laughed. It is not the same." The king rose, trembling with fury. "You think your kind can destroy us with crude toys and savage fire? You are nothing but vermin in the dark, gnawing at giants." The man's eyes sharpened, though his smile did not fade. "Giants forget that vermin survive the collapse. We do not need elegance. We only need patience." The throne room shook violently as another bombardment struck. Cracks spidered across the vaulted ceiling. Dust drifted like ash, and the guards glanced upward in fear. The king's composure faltered further. "Why?" he shouted, his voice echoing too loudly in the chamber. "Why do you fight like this? Why not kneel and die as others do?" The man stepped closer, chains trailing like the sound of judgment. His voice dropped lower, intimate, carrying across the silence with deliberate clarity. "Because you mocked our mothers. Because you threatened our children. You mistook kindness for weakness. And you made laughter a weapon. Humans do not forgive insults carved that deep. We build wars from them." The king's eyes widened, and in that instant the trap was revealed. Across the stars, simultaneous detonations bloomed. Not human weapons this time, but the Empire's own. Charges planted days ago in fuel depots. Sabotage slipped into supply ships under the guise of tribute. Viruses hidden in trade goods that now corrupted entire networks. While the king laughed, humanity had been laying kindling across his empire. The bombardments above were only the spark. Screens in the throne room flickered, displaying collapsing fleets, rebelling colonies, infrastructure failing like a body struck in the heart. The king stared, realization dawning with horror. "You planned this." The man inclined his head with perfect courtesy. "Of course, Majesty. Diplomacy, after all, is only strategy spoken slowly." The guards broke, panic scattering them like leaves in a storm. Some threw down weapons, others fled screaming. The king remained frozen, his crown slipping, his empire unraveling in real time. The man closed the distance between them. Despite the inferno outside, he was calm, every step precise. He stopped before the throne, his eyes steady, his smile faint. "You should not have laughed," he said. The king lurched forward, clawed hand raised in one last, desperate strike. The man caught it easily, chains tightening around the king's wrist with the finality of judgment. He leaned close, voice low enough to feel like a whisper against the king's crown. "This is not extinction, Majesty. This is correction. The galaxy will remember you not as conqueror, but as cautionary tale." With a twist, the chains tightened. The king gasped, stumbled, then collapsed into his throne. His eyes, wide with disbelief, stared at nothing as smoke swallowed the chamber. The man released the chains and stepped back, bowing faintly to the fallen monarch, as though dismissing a meeting that had run too long. Then he turned, walking through the burning hall as the roof gave way, stars spilling in like witnesses to the end. Outside, the dropship reappeared, Marines waving him aboard. The women and children huddled inside, eyes wide, faces streaked with ash and tears. The boy clutched his mother's hand, staring at the man with a mixture of awe and fear. The man entered calmly, as if nothing unusual had transpired, and sat among them. He offered the boy a nod, the same quiet smile. "It's over," he said softly. The boy shook his head. "No, it's just starting." The man's smile widened faintly. "Wise child." As the dropship lifted into the sky, the capital crumbled below, its towers folding inward, its fleets burning out. Across the galaxy, broadcasts carried the images: the king's humiliation, the empire's collapse, the human fleet burning like vengeful constellations. To every watching world, a single truth crystallized. Humanity was not fragile. It was patient. It was relentless. And it would not be mocked without consequence. The man looked out the viewport as stars stretched into the blur of faster than light. His reflection in the glass was calm, polite, unassuming, but his eyes carried the weight of inevitability. He whispered, not to the boy or the women or the soldiers, but to the stars themselves. Now the war begins.